Europa Universalis V isn't even out yet, but I'm already planning my first campaign. Since the media embargo is finally over, I've been watching so many reviews and gameplay videos of all the YouTubers who got early access, and I just have to say I'm excited. I'm hyped, you could say. While I've always liked EU4, in fact, it was my very first Paradox game that I ever played. I remember I was 12 and it had like a free weekend. And I just fell in love. I honestly blame this game for making me fall down the Paradox rabbit hole, because then I got hooked on Crusader Kings 2, then Hearts of Iron 3, and now here I am 10 years later, living in my mom's basement and basically owning every single Paradox title, and I buy almost all the DLC. But, if you're watching this video, you're probably in the same boat. Hopefully you also still don't live with your parents. Unless you want to. I mean, it's pretty awesome. Now, EU4 has always been probably my least favorite Paradox title of the mainline titles. Not to say it's bad, I'm not saying that it's the worst Paradox game, it's just my personal least favorite. I would still consider it the best empire building game ever. You have to manage every part of your empire, from economy to military to cultural makeup. It really does go in depth, but honestly, it just has insane DLC bloat, which you could really say about the vast majority of Paradox titles that last as long as EU4 has, but it's not really new player welcome. And it's just prohibitively expensive to buy all the DLC, and I think that really does scare a lot of people away. And I think a lot of the DLC doesn't really add like true value to the game. Like, a lot of it is just flavoring, which is nice, but that doesn't really add a lot of value unless you like playing as those empires. That's why I'm glad that EU5 is finally coming out, and we're getting our first look at what it will be like. I mean, it's going to be a clean slate for new and old fans alike. But why did the game need a clean slate? Some of the biggest complaints of EU4 are the engine, the UI, the too easy AI, and the DLC fatigue. So let's sort of tackle all those issues and see how EU5 seems to be handling them. First is the engine. I mean, the engine and gameplay in EU4 are fine, but they did have a lot of like weird kinks. Like, whenever you wanted to quit your game and return to the main menu, the whole game would basically have to restart, and it would take a while no matter what sort of, GPU you are using. And most players didn't like how the engine in game handled certain things like trade. So if you're unfamiliar with how EU4 worked, you would have these trade centers, and that's where you could make the most amount of money in trade, and where all the trade in the game world would be routed. So they weren't really dynamic at all, and they were all placed at the start of the game in historical places that were big trading ports and towns. But even if you had a huge empire, more trade wouldn't be routed your way like it would have been historically in real life. In real life, a lot of people don't trade with America today because it has a great port system, or because historically this is where all the trading's been done, but because we're one of the wealthiest, strongest nations on earth, so naturally, citizens have more money to spend on things, so other countries and companies want access to the American market. And by the way, don't start any comments. When I say wealthiest nation, I am talking about GDP and purchasing parity power. Please do not spam the comments talking to me about healthcare or welfare or how America sucks. Please, I'm making a general statement to illustrate a point. I do not want to go into the semantics of it at all. So now I'm glad you can make a trade post anywhere, and the whole system is a lot more dynamic, which I think is a rather big issue in EU4, is the somewhat static world state. Another issue was that there was no pop system. Now, I'm of the mind that almost every single Paradox game should have an actual pop system, like Imperator Rome. In Europa Universalis V, your manpower could only be applied to your army. It didn't affect anything else, not how many goods you produced. That was it. It only applied to how many men you could field and replace in your army. So if you stacked enough buffs or really focused on manpower, you could be replenishing something crazy like 100,000 men a month. And especially late game, you could have wars that just have more casualties than people existed at that time. I mean, seriously, check out some of the subreddit, what people have posted. They'll have like 1 billion casualties in a war. And it just has no effect on your nation at large. Many countries throughout history have reeled from casualties caused in one battle. In the real world, the Battle of Agincourt, which you might be familiar with, and I'm definitely pronouncing that wrong, but it was between the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of France in 1415, and it led to a resounding English victory where they captured a huge portion of the nobility of France. Thousands of knights and other political leaders were killed or captured. This devastated France for decades. EU4, your military casualties had no influence on anything else. So I'm glad they're finally switching to a more pop-based system where your military manpower is drawn from the same manpower pool as your farms and other industries. It's just going to make the whole game a lot more dynamic and make victory and losses more important. Another thing I'm glad they're switching to is having a research tree instead of just doing how they handle research in EU4, which is basically you collect up a certain amount of mana for diplomatic, military, and administrative, and then once you had enough points, you can then unlock the next tier in technology, what would give you certain buffs or unlock new troops, which I always thought was a very weird abstraction of just how efficient your leader was, because the mana you got was based on how many points of those that your leader had. So I'm glad they're moving to a more research base where now there's different things you can rush and not rush. I think it just adds a little bit more to do to the game and sort of, I don't want to say solidifies, it sort of grounds it more in reality rather than abstraction. Now, with the DLC fatigue issue that EU4 had, this game is a brand new one. It will obviously be wiping the slate clean. Players who were interested in EU4 but all the DLC scared them away will have no problem buying this new game. That's honestly one of my biggest issues with trying to get my friends into Paradox titles, because I tell them to buy it, and then they see that there's like $400 worth of DLC to buy. And I mean, it does scare people away because they think that it's going to be a big cash investment to play. Now with this new title, no issues. So according to the YouTubers who got early access, the AI does seem to be really competent, which I'll be honest, I'm not sure how true that really is. Players gave a few examples, like having it where it takes moral to move and then assaulting causes your army to lose moral. So one player was sieging down a castle, he decided to assault the castle and then the enemy army started to move in, which, is pretty smart for the AI to do. But I'm not sure just how competent it's really going to be. I think once players start understanding how the whole game works and all the systems, I imagine you're going to be able to do a lot to sort of cheese the AI. But Paradox won't really know until the player base at large is unleashed on the game. It's one thing to have a couple of QA testers and some YouTubers play it. It's another thing to have 100,000 people playing it. Another big feature that they're really touting is that world conquest is impossible. Which I agree, that was one of EU4's biggest problems, was the blobbing that you would do as the player. Once you became the strongest power in-game, it just became boring. I mean, you could do a world conquest from there, but what would be the point when you just curb stop any opponent? I'm glad that military conquest is going to be a lot harder, and actually holding on to more territory is hard. Because that was the big issue in EU4, that once you took the territory, you might just have to deal with a couple rebels, but they were so easy to manage. It took no effort to really hold on to new territory that you took. Another thing that makes it harder in this new one to control a territory is that if your primary culture isn't the culture of that territory that you took, it's going to be a lot more rebellious, it doesn't give as much taxes, it's just going to be a lot harder to hold on to and maintain. Now, from what I've seen of gameplay, the UI still looks a little rough, which isn't the worst thing in the world, especially for a Paradox titles. I think a lot of the UIs can look a little iffy, but I hope they clean it up a little bit. I think that'll just be some nice quality of life. But I really think that every addition that they're adding to the game is for the best, and I'm beyond excited, Now, it is still a Paradox game, which I do think a couple of YouTubers have mentioned. You have to play a lot of hours to really get a feel for this game. Like, I remember when Victoria 3 first came out, everybody was loving it, all the beta players were loving it. They even had that little, snafu where it got leaked early and people were liking it a lot. But then once you put, 100, 200 hours into it, you kind of realize that every nation plays the same, there's not too much variety. So again, I'm optimistic for EU5, but I think until it's actually out and we're able to put a lot of hours into it, we won't be able to get a real feel for what the game is. So I do hope the launch is a lot better than Victoria 3's. I think the lead dev, Johan, is really good at his job, and I hope that the team can deliver the game that Johan and we all want. So that's really all I got. You know, feel free to tell me in the comments how excited or unexcited you are. You know, I can definitely see both sides of the coin, especially with Paradox's recent DLC releases. They have been real messy. Like, especially, oh my god, Stellaris, they really shit the bed on that one most recently. But, you know, overall, I'm excited. That's all I got. If you made it this far, please like, subscribe, and remember that Jesus loves you. And one more thing, shout out Scuff Scribbles, he's the GOAT.